and happy Halloween. Today we are going to be making this historically inspired Little Red Riding Hood outfit. So my concept behind this is to do a Little Red Riding Hood outfit from the period in which the story first appears. And of course, since it's a folktale, it's kind of impossible to know exactly when it first appears, but according to my research, the first recorded copy was in the 10th century, so that is what we will be doing today. Alright, so the first step of this process was to pull out some of my costuming reference books and search for kind of what I was looking for. I had misspoken in my intro and I said that the story originated in the 10th century, but what I really meant was it could be traced to stories from the 10th century. So I'm still going for 10th century. My books didn't really have much, so instead I turned to the internet before I made my sketch, which you can see me doing here, and I found some references of dig sites from the 10th century, which I am going to say so many times in this video, and I kind of had an idea of the pieces that I wanted from images from those dig sites. I also made a Pinterest board of other people's recreations of this dig site, which I cannot pronounce, but will link in the description. So I had a really hard time figuring out what to do for the hood, because I couldn't find any definitive evidence of 10th century hoods. At the dig site that I have mentioned, that starts with an H, there is something that resembles a hood, but there's debate about whether or not it is a hood or like a child's tunic. So here I am sketching out a few ideas. None of them I really liked. I had that hood that I mentioned from the 10th century, just 2 pieces of fabric. It was just a whole mess. Okay, so I think I found a solution to my hood problem. I wasn't finding a lot of useful things on Pinterest. I was finding this one, which the lippery, I think that's how you say that word, this thing, is like a little too much for me, and I kind of wanted something a little more fashionable. And then other references I was finding of people's recreations had like this little cap, which also really wasn't quite a riding hood. And then I found this recreation. These are all from, Scandinavian words. Hedeby, something like that, Hedeby. Don't know how to say that, I apologize very much. This is another recreation from that same dig site, which is just a small village where they found a lot of archaeological evidence. They're all from the 10th century specifically, and she has the cap and this blanket cape thing, and I thought maybe if I made both of those red, that would read as a riding hood. And then I found this hood, which is later. I think it's supposed to be from the 11th century, but I kind of like it for fashion reasons. Like, it's really hard to tell in this image, so here are some, let's see if I can find someone's recreation of it. Here's like a recreation of what that would look like. So this looks much more like a actual riding hood, and is just much more what I want to go for with this project. I don't really care that it's a century later than everything else, because I don't want to look ridiculous. Like, this project is not only to be, I'm not trying to be perfectly historically accurate anyway, because that is impossible, and it just seems more, I just think it will look better if I do it with this. So there's the pattern, if any of you were wondering. So I'm excited. I think I'm gonna start with this. I'm not gonna hand sew anything, even though that is a possibility, just because I have to do this in a pretty short time frame with also a bunch of school stuff due nearly at the same time. So we're gonna machine sew it. I might do some edge stitching around the end because that seems like an easy thing I can do. But yeah, I will link this resource that I found in the description so that you can also look at it if you would like. But there's the hood problem solved. No more stress. Okay, so here are the fabrics that I got for this project. First, I have this polyester creepy stuff. I regret buying this. Bad decision. Wanted linen. Should have splurged for the linen. It's a lot more mustardy in person than it is on camera. Then I just have some off-white unbleached muslin and some old red broadcloth that I'm going to use for the hood. Since the apron was the easiest part, I decided to start with that. So I just cut 2 rectangles out of the fabric by tearing it because this is my favorite thing to do. It is so satisfying. And then I pinned that on my body and cut out a neckline as well as some straps for the ties that will go on my waist. And then those got ironed and then ironed in half so that they would turn out nicely. And then I also ironed the front and back pieces of my apron because they were a little wrinkly. Most of this had to be done by hand. Since there were very few seams, I literally just sewed the tubes to make the ties and then the shoulder seams. So I am ironing over the seam allowances, not the seam allowances I guess, the hems of all the edges of both sides of the apron so that I can hand stitch them down, which took forever. But you know, you can't have machine top stitching on a 10th century garment. It's not gonna look right. Okay, so now that that is done, I'm just making sure that the shoulder seams line up. But before we sew those together, we need to finish off the neckline. To finish it off, I'm just doing some bias strips. I didn't do this super well. These are not actually cut on the bias. They're just the strips of cotton that I had left over, which I didn't have enough to cut it on the bias, so it was the best I could do. But it did create kind of a wrinkly look once it was all done, so past me, why didn't you just buy more fabric so you could make some real bias tape? Please do that in the future. And finally, the shoulder seams can be sewn together. I'm doing a French seam. I don't really know why I didn't finish any other seams in this, because there's a shift layer, and that's what the shift is for. To sew on the ties, I first needed to make sure that they were actually going to fall at my waistline. So to do this, I just put the apron on and pinned one of them on where I wanted it to sit, and then I went through and made sure that all of the other 4 were exactly at that same height on all the other sides of the apron. And that, once again, just got hand sewed on. Okay, so here's my math for the hood pieces based on that image I showed you before. I have no actual idea if this is gonna work or not, because I have not taken a math class in many moons. Luckily, I have a lot of this fabric. I bought it years ago now for something completely different, but it's kind of perfect. It's just I think it's a cotton broadcloth. That's what it feels like to me, but I'm not 100% sure. So even if my math is off, hopefully I'll have enough to cut it out again. So I'm gonna put on some "and" with an E, and we're just gonna see how this goes. Alright, and then all the hood pieces get cut out. Just like with everything else I do with cotton, I am tearing it, and it was wonderful and satisfying. And then those get ironed, and they are super wrinkly, and ironing it didn't really work because they have been sitting in a drawer for many years, and they didn't want to come out. I did do a better job later, but for now, that's good enough for constructing. And then the top of the hood is just getting pinned together, and then we can insert those gores for the front and the back, and then stitch it all on. can't get it over my head. This opening here is not wide enough for my head to go through. So we're making another one. Make another one we did. This looks kind of like a gross color on this camera for whatever reason. In real life, it's a nice mustardy yellow, and this is going to be the dress. It is a polyester, like, not cotton. It's a polyester something. I'm not sure exactly what, but I could not afford the beautiful linen that I wanted because it was expensive, and this is the best. Like, I wanted a very specific color and texture, and this is the best that I could come up with, even though it is polyester and therefore not historically accurate in the slightest. This was just more cutting of rectangles, but since this was a polyester and not a nice woven cotton, I couldn't do my favorite technique of tearing it, so I meticulously marked it all and cut everything while I was folded to try to make sure it was as straight as possible. Didn't really work, but it was the best I could do. So the sleeves are rectangles, the front and back rectangles, and then there are 4 triangular gores inserted into the skirt, as well as 2 triangles, or 4 triangles total, I guess, at the underarms, which make it so that I can move my arms. So yeah, just lots of cutting. So then that'll get pinned together. I started at the bottom and I didn't connect the 2 rectangles for the front and the back yet. I just started from the bottom, worked my way up with the gores, pinning them so that they would lay exactly at my waist, because they weren't long enough for me to be able to give myself excess. So I just decided the dress might be a little shorter than preferred, but it was worth it to have them lay exactly at my hips. And then those got very carefully stitched together. Now let's put it all on. I'm using the shift from the 17th century that I made a while back, just because it was similar enough shape and it was mostly for a warm layer. And here is the finished dress. The gores look a little weird in the front and the back. If I were to do this again, I would slice the front and the back open in the center front and the center back so that the seam was an even amount of allowance all the way through and didn't pull super funnily. But since the apron's going to be covering it, I figured it didn't really matter so much. And then my next layer is that apron that I just mentioned, which just goes right over my head. I couldn't remember which side was the front or if it mattered at all. Please ignore my scrunchie. I couldn't find a normal hair tie, but it does get replaced later on. And finally, the most important part, the little red riding hood. This was actually my favorite part of the costume just because it was so simple but turned out really cute, and I really like it and want to make more from this century because it took literally 10 minutes to construct. So it was a fun, easy, simple project. And there it is all done. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment what other centuries you'd like to see. If you would like me to do some more historical inspired content. I had a really good time with this, and I hope you all have a good, safe, happy Halloween. Okay, bye!